Bonjour, good afternoon, good day, and kia ora from the Australia-New Zealand Biochar Industry Group, also known as ANZBIG. The title of this panel discussion today is the Australian Biochar Industry 2030 Roadmap to a New Carbon Economy. And I am joined today by some of Australia's leading biochar technology providers. We have Nigel Murphy from Earth Systems, Peter Burgess from Rainbow Beta, Craig Bagnall from the SEATA Group, and Joseph TAOUK from Circology. I'm Don COYNE. I'm the CEO of ANZBIG, and ANZBIG is a not-for-profit industry group. We are a cluster model that bring together the entrepreneurs, the researchers, the finance sector, the government and non-government organisations, and the corporates that want to go net zero. We have a focus focusing on standards, communications, market intelligence, policy, and finance, and we have executive and advisory boards with vast range of skills and experience, and we have a code of practice, and we'll produce the roadmap in 2023. Our challenges in Australia are mainstream understanding of the benefits of biochar, not yet. Large volumes of affordable biochar for large-scale applications, not yet. Commercial demonstrations of biochar in large-scale applications such as broadacre and horticulture, not yet. Government acceptance, not yet. Our solutions are communications programs such as webinars, newsletters, conferences, workshops, and networking events. The 2030 roadmap to attract investment, to expand the industry, and to update our business plan. Code of practice for sustainable production and use, considering carbon drawdown certification. Collaboration with IBI, EBI, Bio360, and other networking opportunities. These are some of the biochar uses in Australia. So from the top, animal feed, and going down, right down to a more sustainable source of carbon for fuel. Wood vinegar is of interest, and we see it as a big potential market in Australia, also known as pyroligneous acid, smoke water. So wood vinegar, for those who don't know, contains 200 natural compounds that can assist with nut and fruit development, strong root growth, builds resilience to pest and disease, and improved germination. So the Biochar Industry 2030 roadmap to a new carbon economy is beyond net zero, carbon removal with economic, environmental, and community benefits for Australia and New Zealand. We held a summit. We had very good industry input into the roadmap, and it was quite successful. Our timeline was initiated in March last year, and we've run the stakeholder engagement throughout 2022, and we'll release it likely March, April this year. The ANZBIG Pavilion has been supported and sponsored by Echo2, so that's the Sky Carbon to Earth Technology, Peter Burgess, Earth Systems, Charmaker, the SEATA Group, Waste Circology, and Optimal Group. And we now welcome Craig DUGAN from Optimal. If you are a private company or government body in the carbon drawdown sector wanting to achieve net zero by 2030 to 2050, you can be part of the solution and help us create a new carbon economy by becoming an ANZBIG member. So we are inviting all participants of Bio360 to join ANZBIG and assist us in the scale up of the Australian biochar industry collaborate and help lead to a new carbon economy. So I'm now going to hand it over to and ask the first question to Nigel. So Nigel, as Chair of ANZBIG and co-founding Director of Earth System, what do you see as the top 3 priorities for the emerging biochar industry in Australia, and how are you implementing these at ANZBIG and Earth Systems?
Thanks for that question, Don. I think the answer is very different if I'm talking about ANZBIG versus Earth Systems. I think one thing to start off with is that is to understand some of the characteristics of Australia. We have a lot of wasted biomass in Australia because we don't use it for heating in the way that biomass is used in Europe. We also have a high per capita CO2 emission because we're a large continent. We travel long distances and we consume a lot. So, and then I think the third factor for Australia is that we're a very dry, mostly dry and fragile continent with soils that are in many parts of Australia are impoverished. So this means that, you know, biochar is really a no-brainer for Australia. It has the potential to not only sequester carbon but improve soils and also use in a productive way our biomass. So it's a great opportunity for Australia, I think, to be a biochar leader, and I think we probably have a lot of interest in the sector because of those reasons. We're also quite a multicultural country, so we travel a lot. We like to see what other people are doing in other parts of the world, and so it's great to have the opportunity to be here at Nantes, and congratulations to Bio360 for hosting such a wonderful event. But getting back to the question, Don, the 3 things I think for ANZBIG, well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that in the last 12 to 24 months, we've come a very long way. The biochar sector is really going from a cottage industry where the economics are not really that well proved to a mainstream industry where, you know, the economics of production and use of biochar are rapidly becoming more obvious. So what we have to do, I think, is to continue to build that momentum, and particularly to reach out to supporters and interest groups that don't know what biochar is. So in Australia, one of our problem groups is actually the government, the federal, state and local governments. They have very little knowledge of biochar. It's a new sector. So we need to do that education piece. The second thing I think that is important is that we're now moving into an area where, moving from cottage to a mainstream industry, there are risks that are emerging. There are people coming into our sector who are there really to make money, and they're not necessarily the true believers that really started a lot of the biochar, done a lot of the good work in biochar to date. They're people that will take risks, will push the envelope, and we need to make sure that in the biochar sector we develop good standards. We have organisations like ANZBIG that help make sure that the operators, the biochar producers, and the way biochar is used is in a beneficial and importantly sustainable way. We don't want, like what I heard earlier, you know, biochar being dumped in mine adits because it's sequestering carbon and it's not being used for a productive purpose. Those sorts of things will undermine the industry long term. So I think managing risks is a key part of ANZBIG. I think the other thing that has been prominent in the biochar industry to date has been collaboration, working together. There's a lot of contact between companies and organisations working all over the world. And I think only through keeping that collaboration can we break down the inertia. So we have a lot of inertia in our system, which means that it's hard to convince farmers that biochar can help them. It's hard to convince governments that biochar is safe. It's not a hazardous material. So it's only through collaboration and working together will we break down some of those barriers. So we have to be patient and persistent, and we have to keep working to build the industry, build the cake. So they're the three, Don.
Great. Thank you, Nigel. Peter Burgess, you are our Vice Chair of ANZBIG, and you're the Managing Director at Rainbow Biochar. Rainbow Biochar is a carbon removals project developer with the goal of 1 million tonnes a year of carbon removal by 2030. ANZBIG's roadmap aims for the industry in Australia and New Zealand to produce and use several million tonnes of biochar each year by the end of this decade. What do you see as essential to reaching these goals for ANZBIG? So, it's up there, and you read it in front of you, and it's behind you.
Yeah, got it. Yep. So Echo 2 is all about the journey we've been on for 15 years. Ian Stanley and I formed this company in 2007, and the whole idea was take CO2 out of the sky and put it in the ground in a beneficial way as biochar. And to do that in a way that was economic, we needed to sell the fuel gas. We needed to create a clean fuel gas that we got revenue from. And what we never believed that Australia would have a carbon removal, any sort of carbon removal market. And so we never based the economics on that. But we've been delighted to see those markets start to develop over the last 2 or 3 years. So it is now a form of certified carbon removal. Thanks, Tom.
Right.
Yeah, good idea.
Just a big room.
Yeah. I won't go through the technology. I think I just want to make a couple of points again that Nigel made. So this gives some indication of scale up. So the three little photographs there are the 3 plants that have been part of our history so far. The one on the left was a quarter scale prototype that we did all the R&D work where we made biochar and flared syngas on Ian Stanley, my business partner's wheat farm in Western Australia. 2013, 2014. In the middle is the 1 hectare glasshouse that we heat with recycled wood, returning biochar to the same recycling company that goes into compost, and that's been running since early 2020. And then we're building this much larger plant to provide heat to a 21 hectare glasshouse at Katunga in Victoria, and we expect that to come online in mid-2023. So what are the barriers? Firstly, there's plenty of biomass, and I put a number there that any of our calculations would say that Australia's capacity for these sort of projects is something like 100 to 1,000 of those projects on the right-hand side. So very, very large capacity to provide sustainable biomass and soak up the biochar in soils. We've focused on soils. We think that's the most beneficial use for our biochar. And in the case of Katunga on the right-hand side, we've already started field trials in farms within 100 kilometres of Katunga and getting farmers there used to biochar and wood vinegar. And already they're seeing great results. And so we don't think there's going to be too much problem with selling all of the biochar and wood vinegar that comes out of that facility. This is the Katunga plant being built. So this is about a month ago, this photo was taken. The image on the right, you can see the 6 Eco2 modules. It'll be run on large square bales of straw using good Danish technology that'll pick up those bales of straw and shred them before they're fed into our Eco2 system. So our motivation, ever since we started, is to scale carbon removal faster. The reason we were attracted to come to Bio360, we first came here in 2020, is the same as it is today. We're wondering how we might contribute in Europe. And so a question we've got that maybe someone in the audience can help us with is, where are the underutilised local biomass residues of, say, 30,000 tonne a year or more of scale? Which regions or soils or crops would benefit most from low-cost biochar? Because the char that comes out of our system is much lower cost than you are used to in Europe. What are the possibilities for wood vinegar? And then we're looking around for skilled, motivated local partners, other project developers, engineering and service. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Peter. Wonderful, yeah. So on to Craig Bagnall from the SEATA Group. So as biohydrogen and biochar trailblazers, and firstly, Craig, as a key member of the ANZBIG board, what is at the forefront of your ambition both for ANZBIG and SEATA Group, and how can the Australian biochar industry take its rightful place in the great global bio transition?
Just a short question there, Don. Thanks, Don. G'day, everybody. Thank you for coming and seeing our group. We're all here, as Don said, as a collective, and I guess that's where ANZBIG has, it was put together as a concept of collectively we can be stronger. And certainly we believe that being here together, putting together our code of practice to set standards in our industry, in terms of this ambition about where we could go, I would like to see ANZBIG take these opportunities in Australia and beyond to the deserving endpoint that biochar can go, which is to actually take it to industrial scale for carbon removal at gigaton level. Now, that's where, as a global negative emissions technology, biochar has been seen as potentially being a cottage industry. And the IPCC in the 6th assessment report last year has identified that it has potential to go to 6.6 gigatons maximum as an upper of drawdown per annum. And but also one of the key things, though, is that with biochar, it is there to enhance food production. It's not going to compete with it. And that's a really important differential point as we go to scale for our technologies. In terms of our company, SEATA, I might just get John and Jesse to put their hands up here. We're here together on the ANZBIG Pavilion. We're a technology development. We're coming in behind these pioneers that are in front of us, that sit strongly beside us, that have set the path in Australia. We're looking at a next generation where we are looking at thermal and chemical looping. And what we're doing there is trying to engineer a syngas that can be more than just energy by itself. It can also be derivatives for hydrogen, biomethane, building blocks of plastics such as olefins, and a very high-grade CO2 for carbon capture. And all at the same time, having drawdown for carbon dioxide removal with biochar. So, and been doing that at both a small scale, say typical conventional things of 1 to 5 tonne per hour type of systems, all the way up to industrial scale. So, but this is part, we've got a talk tomorrow where we're here not just with biochar, but with biohydrogen. And so we're talking tomorrow afternoon about, I think 3 o'clock we're on, and we're looking at trying to show that the cost of biohydrogen compared to some of your conventional ways of making it, including your green hydrogen from electrolysis, is actually in a much better place for to look at it this way. And why would you do it? Because it's carbon negative. It can actually provide removal as well as avoidance for emissions. One of the key things with our technology is to try and make that syngas with that secondary sequestration mechanism to try and take our So we have the primary with biochar, where about half that carbon is going to be sunk. But we also then are looking to go to a secondary sequestration, where possibly we could see upwards of 3/4 of the carbon that comes in being sunk. Now, obviously, with carbon removal, that's when you have biomass. You're intercepting the carbon cycle to carbonise that and keep it down in the long term. But we're also looking at dealing with problematic feedstocks, so circularity. So this is about clean energy with carbon removal in a circular and regenerative manner that's good for the people and planet. And we think we can deal with some of these other issues that are problematic too, such as end-of-life plastics and biosolids. And we've got a big issue in Australia with invasive weeds. We've got literally hundreds of thousands of square kilometres in my state, New South Wales, and millions of square kilometres of prickly acacia in Queensland that a few of us are quite active in trying to deal with as well. I'll move past all this if I can. Sorry. Old slide. This is probably where the big one for us. So we're currently a pilot. We've got an R&D centre in New South Wales in the Northern Tablelands at John's Farm. He's, apart from being a process engineer and chemical engineer from the steel industry background, he's also a fifth-generation farmer. So we're looking to try and put things into soils. This is a clean feedstocks pilot at 200 to 300 kilos an hour. And where we're looking to do then is to head up towards commercial plant at 5 tonne an hour, but with potential to go to 40 tonnes per hour. And the reason why that becomes interesting is as a regenerative drawdown sink, direct air capture, which is fantastic, but it's in terms of scalability, biochar and biohydrogen has a lot of potential here to go to significant drawdown. So in terms of Peter and Nigel and our collective, ANZBIG's ambitions to go to gigaton drawdown and 1 million tonnes per annum by 2030, we certainly feel that we'll be able to help significantly that by having both centralised and large systems as well as small systems. And there's just a last shot on some of those problematic areas. Textiles is a good one. If anyone hasn't spoken to the guys at the Italian Biochar Industry Consortium that's here, ICHAR, they're doing some great work with looking at engineered carbons, and textiles to batteries is one of the areas they've been looking at, which is fascinating. It's certainly somewhere that we'd like to be involved with as well and going forward. I think I'll end it there, Don. On tomorrow, and if you want to see us, we're at ANZBIG Pavilion's only about 20 metres from here.
Thanks, Craig, and yeah, thank you for we've now got about 7, I think, water utilities as members of ANZBIG, and Craig's been quite integral in getting them on board. So a lot of action happening in that space in Australia. So Joseph Took, Waste Ecology. As a new player on the block for not only the Australian biochar industry but globally, why and how can your innovative technology take us to the next level of transforming waste into a resource?
Thanks, Don. First of all, I'd like to thank Don for the opportunity he gave us to come to this conference. I joined ANZBIG just last year in November, and I was introduced by Don to come to this event. Thanks so much for NZ Group and all members. Our background is engineering consultant company and development company in Sydney. So having so much construction waste in Sydney, it's unbelievable. And the concept of having the construction waste there led us to develop a new technology. It's called OCS, which is stand for Organic Carbonization System. First of all, the technology is supposed to convert or actually divert the construction waste from the landfill, and we end up with a technology which could actually convert any kind of waste from the landfill. Then we can, in terms of biomass, we can convert any kind of biomass to biochar with very high yield, like our yield factor nearly about 45%, 60%. Timber sometimes reaches 90%, which is quite high figures. The independent academic testing proved that the biochar produced by the OCS, it's very rich in nutrients and carbon and very stable. Um, Also, the other waste, which go back to the original concept, being like non-organic waste or synthetic waste, such as plastic, car tires, nylon, soft plastic, PVC, hospital waste, textile, any kind of other waste other than metal. It could be also converted to synchar, which is very rich in carbon. Like we have about probably ranging from 80% to 90%. Car tires, it's shown there at F36 pictures. We converted it to yield factor about 90%. Our objective is to extract the carbon from the plastic or car tires and reuse it to remanufacture another car toys to or another plastic industry, whether soft plastic or hard plastics. The stability of the biochar we reach, it's quite very high. In terms of technically, in terms of modular ratio, it's nearly like 0.01 to 0.2, which is that's make it very, very stable against the natural weathering. The commercial scalability of the reactor, OCS reactor, is quite large. Like we can do 150 ton per day per unit reactor. That's quite high figure, and that could be extended or more modules added to the reactor. Maybe you can do 1,000 ton a day of waste conversion. The biochar itself, whether it's biomass or synchar, the objective is just to report it into circular economy and reuse it and divert it from the landfill and have so many applications, whether it's whether it's land fertilizer or construction waste. Or I attended a few seminars just next those platforms where like they're looking for green buildings, and the biochar we produce could be used for also to enhance the reduction of carbon dioxide and other emissions and the green and the construction industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can visit us at www.circology.com.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, welcome aboard. Finally, Craig Dugan from the Optimal Group. Craig, given that Optimal Group is an established clean tech energy provider, can you please detail why you got involved in the emerging Australian biochar industry and what you are doing in this segment of the worldwide carbon removal sector? And how do you think Australian-based technology can contribute to that sector?
That's a lot of questions. So Optimal was formed in 2012, and I came out of the oil and gas industry, and I'd done a lot in carbon capture and sequestration, and I formed a view that that was never going to provide an economic answer to carbon emissions, and continuing and possibly it was just encouraging the continued use of fossil fuels. So we formed Optimal, and we went into the sort of cogeneration space, and have now gone much more into hybrid energy systems. So we power buildings or mine sites or industrial processes, and it'll be a combination of turbines, batteries, solar. If the customer has a wind connection or any other form of energy connection, we'll integrate with that, and we'll manage it, and with the aim of reducing their energy costs and reducing their CO2 emissions. A few years ago, we were asked by McCain Foods to look at one of their big potato chip manufacturing facilities in Victoria, and it was quite interesting because it's an 8 megawatt electrical load and 25 megawatt thermal, and they process 600 tons a day of potatoes to make 400 tons a day of potato products and 200 tons of waste. So the waste they were putting into an anaerobic digester, making biomethane, and then they came to us to put turbines to run the biomethane. So we put 1.2 megawatts of capstone turbines in, and then we've recovered the hot exhaust, which has still got 19% oxygen, and we've put a new 25 megawatt burner on the existing boiler, and said we're using hot combustion air at 290 degrees rather than using cold combustion air. So that gives them about a 15% carbon reduction on the boiler, and everyone's happy. What was interesting is we sat with McCain's to say, well, how could they further reduce their CO2 emissions? And so we went to the power provider and we said, well, what about giving us an increase in electrical supply from 8 megs to 35 megawatts, and we'll shut the boiler down and go all electric. And the guys from the provider, they laughed and they said, we'll all be retired or dead or both before that amount of power comes into that area. And so it was, for me, it was a lightning bolt moment. You know, companies who want to decarbonise, but in many, certainly in Australia, this is very common. The capacity for the grid to replace natural gas, which is being used for high pressure steam or for direct heating, is just not there right now, and it'll take some time. So it was clear to us that biogas is the pathway for that we need green gas in our networks. And it really doesn't matter whether that green gas is biomethane, or if it's hydrogen, or if it's DME or whatever it is. You can't put DME in the pipework. So we now have become a developer of biomethane projects, and we've just recently announced our first project in Tasmania, which will produce a terajoule a day of gas, and we've partnered with Lindy, so that will go into an LNG plant, and we'll be processing 400 tonnes a day of organic waste from large-scale food producers. So we think that, I mean, Australia is a long way behind Europe. The biogas industry in Australia is in its infancy. Most organics in Australia goes into landfill. So that's got to change. And then I guess in terms of biochar, I have a little holiday house, and I got to meet my neighbour one day, and he's got this funny company called RBE, Rainbow Bee Eater, and he makes biochar. I thought, what the hell's all of that? And anyhow, cut a long story short, I met Peter, found out a bit more about biochar, and was amazed at the time that I'd wasted trying to build large-scale carbon capture plants with solvents and compressors and all that sort of mischief. And Pete, the biochar process solves the carbon capture problem in one. And carbon capture, the best carbon capture technology now is still $60 US a ton to capture. You've got to find aquifers that you can inject that gas into and guarantee it's not going to come out. Well, that's hard to do, and you've got to get community acceptance. And I don't think the large-scale carbon capture industry is going to get that acceptance. There was a project in the United States where they started injection, I think it was in Alabama, and they had 2,000 micro earthquakes from the moment they started injection. After a year, they shut it down because they were worried. So biochar doesn't have any of that problem. It's complementary to agriculture. I think it's just so much more sensible, and it's more economic. And then the interesting kind of connection back to our biogas opportunities is that if you've got companies that have got waste, they really often don't want to differentiate whether they've got dry waste or wet waste. They just want to get rid of their waste. So I think the opportunity to have biochar facilities operating in parallel to anaerobic digesters, where you can take anyone's waste, and maybe you can put some biochar into the anaerobic digester, or maybe you can take the biosolids from the anaerobic digester and put them into the pyrolysis. I think it's a really nice match. So that's how I got here. Thank you.
Thank you. A big round of applause for all of our panelists. So we're now going to open it up to the audience. If you've got any questions, I think there's some microphones floating around. So has anyone got any questions for the guys at all? We've got a gentleman over here. If you could just say who you are and where you're from, that'd be great.
Oh, hello. My name is Johnny Gilson. I'm from Carbonaires. We're an asset management firm in London. This is for Craig here. Thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate the circularity model, and thank you for putting the cost comparisons of the different technologies up there. When you're talking about biochar and scaling it and the additional revenues, I assume, from biochar, are you factoring in the credits, biochar credits within that?
I'm with Peter on this. Any good project hopefully can stand on its own merits without the need for credits, and we should be starting at that point. So it's cream. It's obviously a very good cream at the moment because it's carbon removal credits as trading as a premium credit. So you've got the avoidance credits in Australia that trade for $20 Australian a tonne and peak at about 30 odd. And we're looking at over €100 a tonne for a removal credit. So obviously, it's if you can produce it at scale, it can definitely change the viability of projects. But banking on it and the long-term target of it, I wouldn't. Even though I think you should be running on the merits of the commodity values. So hydrogen, if you've got syngas itself and its value, and you've got the carbon value of the commodity, it can stand. But with credits, it is making projects that would otherwise be more difficult to get going, to accelerate, to take off, and that's a good thing. And I think when you've got things like, say, in the US, they've set their Earthshot goal at $100 a tonne of CO2 equivalent as drawdown. When you start looking at, say, direct air capture being in that sort of several $100s a tonne for projects there. I think Bison in the US is now trying to get that right down to go to probably the world's largest one. Mammoth is being built at the moment by Climeworks. They're great projects, but I think when you've got a regenerative, with all the co-benefits that biochar brings, when you actually put the economic analysis on that, you're going to see much better.
No, that makes sense. I guess my line of questioning was going to follow on from that with respect to the additionality of those credits. I appreciate that the funding from the credits can potentially get those projects up and running quicker. I just wonder if there's additionality debate there, if it can run on its own feet, so to say.
Let me have a go at it, because we've been selling Puro credits now for 2 or 3 years, and so we're asked that question a lot. So you saw the earlier slide. So the 1 hectare plant, we sold that without credits, right? So that was sold to the farmer. Recycled wood comes in basically at no cost. Biochar goes out for free, really, into compost, and he gets the gas. And we sold him that plant at 50 cents in the dollar to get a commercial plant away. The second larger plant, there is no way that would have been signed without the prospect of carbon removal credits. Why? Because of the uncertainty, not even uncertainty, the unfamiliarity of any markets for large amounts of biochar. There's 10,000 tonne a year here or 20,000 tonne a year there in different regions. But when we'll be putting out 20,000 tonne a year in one spot, which is nothing when you put it at 1 tonne per hectare in a 100-kilometre radius or something. It's nothing. But the farmers there aren't used to it, and they're not going to pay the €1,000 a tonne that people are used to in the UK or Europe. And so the assumption we've always made is that, well, the farmers will eventually pay what they think the biochar is worth, what value it gives them, for reducing fertiliser, increasing yield, and so on. Our personal view on that, we watch every paper that comes out. In Australia, with our soils, my opinion is it's probably $200, $300, $400 Australian dollars a tonne is about where that'll settle out. And when that happens, then there'll be a reduced risk of starting these projects. But we're not there yet. And so that project, the Katunga project, without the corks, would have been a 6 or 7 year return on capital. With the corks, at a reasonable assumption on price, it's 2 or 3. It got signed. So it's definitely additional at the moment. People ask us when we're selling forward corks now. People ask, what do we expect the market to do over time? And we've always said, well, in time we see the cork, we see the cost of producing carbon removal going down using this methodology. It's why we fell in love with it in the first place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions out there for our gentleman? That also biochar carbon removal credits. Yep. Making biochar affordable, and one of the things that we really need to do is get large-scale commercial trials happening. Would anyone like to talk to about that?
Well, large-scale commercial trials need large-scale commercial plants,
Yes.
right? You can't do one without the other. And so I'm guessing that Katunga will be the first large-scale commercial trial where there's thousands of tons going in. And you know, most of that will be done with farmers that want us to help them measure the results.
Yep.
And also together we'll start looking at how we do the carbon credits for the benefits of carbon in soil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Nigel?
Just to add to that, Don, I think that there's the biochar sector has a little bit of an issue. Biochar is a very general term, and if you look at things like activated carbon and carbon black, they have many products and a range of products with different characteristics. And I think that that's part of the maturity of the biochar market, is when, you know, that biochar will be used for 100 applications, and there will be people selling biochar with different moisture content, surface activation, grain size, from different feedstocks. So this is a sophistication that I think is needed for us to move to that large scale. Because at the moment, if I buy biochar from one provider or another provider, I'm buying different things. So we as an industry need to get better at that. And if you look at the activated carbon sector, it's a 100-year-old industry. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Get to that level, yeah. And I guess our code of practice as well is helping. We have different grades. So do you want to talk to the...
Just to mention the code of practice, I think one of the key things there is the sustainability of what we do, where the biomass comes from. We all know that, you know, pretty much Europe was deforested for an energy source, and part of that was charcoal. That's what's happening in West Africa right now. So it's very important that the feedstock, and there is lots of it, biomass is sustainable that's used to produce biochar. Very, very important.
Yes, yes, indeed. So any other questions from the audience? So the gentleman over there, I think there's a microphone floating around somewhere. If you could just introduce yourself and where you're from, that'd be great.
Hi, I work here in France. My name is Andres. I would like to know from the side of the agriculture farmers, if you feel like they are really used to introduce this new input in their practices, because maybe sometimes they are not aware, or they don't want to spend, or they don't know the ratio between costs and benefits, since they are used to use fertilizers or biopesticides or pesticides, and not maybe so many these kind of inputs. I know if they really see the benefits, they know the price, but they know. So I don't know how is it in Australia, but here in Europe, sometimes it's not easy to sell this kind of biochar to farmers.
I remember when someone said to me about 15 years ago, they told me about mobile phones, and I thought, why would anyone ever want a mobile phone? And then 10 years later, someone said, why would anyone want a mobile phone with a camera in it? I did. I said, why would anyone want that? And now we all carry them. And so I think it's going to be a bit like that journey. There'll be thought leaders. Well, our strategy is we go and find the thought leaders, right? So out of every 100 farmers, there'll be one or two who always operate on the edge. They're always trying to do something a bit different. We go and find them. We give them some free biochar. We give them some free wood vinegar, and we help them do trials. And we help them measure the results of those trials. And so that's what we're doing around Katunga at the moment. We've got about 15 reasonably large-scale trials using biochar from Holofresh, the first plant. I don't think it's going to be any different to that. You know, and one day, all of a sudden, of those 100 farmers, there'll be 10 of them who are doing it, and then the rest of them will just follow. That's our strategy. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions from the audience at all? The gentleman here, making a run around.
Hello, yeah, my name is Luc Lebrun from Natural Energy, biomethane producer in Europe. I just have a question regarding basically the difference between Australia and New Zealand markets regarding the biochars, because you talked about Australia, but New Zealand is a completely different territory and with a lot of different climates as well. So what is basically the differences between these two countries regarding the biochar?
Well, the biochar industry in New Zealand is more embryonic at this stage than it is in Australia. However, the potential is huge. So with all the forestry that's available, the boilers, there's boiler companies at the moment, and there's talk that the boilers could actually be tweaked to make more biochar. But from what we know so far, one of our members is actually the largest distributor of biochar in New Zealand, and it's actually coming off a sawmill, a traditional boiler technology. So it's classified as a high carbon boiler ash, and it's being used in particularly around the Pukekohe area, which is a big fruit and vegetable growing area there. So there's also applications that could be in industrial chars as well. So one of our members has been over there recently talking about finding producers to be used in a bio asphalt as an example. So would anyone, Craig, do you want to?
The other thing about New Zealand is that its dairy industry is having a lot of issues with nitrate runoff into their waterways. The waterways in New Zealand are under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, particularly with eutrophication. And by putting in barriers and interceptors and using biochar in soils, we can do a bit more to try and treat or better manage our nutrient runoff from our farms. So there's a lot of potential for riparian zone management in New Zealand there with that. And I think there's, and then of course there's the actual effluent discharges as well. So as Nigel was alluding to before, biochar can be activated physically and chemically to be a pseudo-activated carbon or a full activated carbon, depending on what you're making it from. And we can see a lot of potential for a circular positive synergy with the water treatment for wastewater management from many industries. I don't know, New Zealand's probably a bit of a different story, but textiles, there are so many industries which have a wastewater problem, but agriculture over there could benefit significantly from this. And one of the things that ANZBIG does is we run, as Don mentioned, is webinars and programs to get that word out and try and do outreach. Biochar is one of those unique areas where we've had decades of research, and there's now nearly 20,000 papers research. One of the researchers in Australia commonly says to us, we know more about biochar than we do about compost. Yet the outreach now, and this is about taking this to from a academic exercise to commercial and through demonstration. So certainly I'd like to reinforce that point about commercial demonstration projects is where we're at now. And what we'd like to do in ANZBIG collectively and individually too as companies is to partner with organisations that would be willing to come with us to help do those demonstrations. We've had some tier one companies now come to approach us in Australia to do so. They're interested in the net zero and the carbon removal aspects, but they're also interested in what can they do good for farmers. I mean, what's the social license and the environmental PR that they can do that they can add value to their own brand by doing so.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I fully agree with that. I think that sort of comes to another point, and that is the economics, the cost of the biochar. So we look at the activated carbon market. You know, you're looking at $2,000–3,000 a tonne for the activated carbon. So that there's a lot of applications where it's too expensive, so it doesn't get used. And, you know, talking about that dairy application for one. But if we can get biochar, which has good activation properties, and we're able to sell it at $600–700 a tonne, there'd be plenty of markets.
And just to add to that, New Zealand, almost half of New Zealand's emissions, greenhouse gases, is coming from animal agriculture. So using biochar as an animal feed could reduce the methane. It means more weight gain in the animals. And then also in Australia, it could be utilised more in New Zealand because their dung beetle program is quite years behind actually Australia's. So you will see in the paddocks all the lumps of grass, which is actually putrid to the animal to eat. So economically, it's just doesn't make sense. So feeding it to animals, the dung beetles bury it. It would solve that eutrophication problem in the waterways as well. So that's, I see as a big potential in New Zealand. Any other questions out there? No? No other questions? Any? Ah, yes, gentlemen.
Hello, my name is Ilke Wolthuizen. I'm from Holland, but living for 12 years already in China before. Now living in Bali, by the way. But I have a special question for Peter, because we are involved in all the high-tech greenhouse in the range from 2 hectares up till 100 hectares, especially in China at this moment. Is there also a solution, for example, to use the biochar finally also in your own production, for example, in the substrate for the young plants, or for maybe some other possibilities?
It's still ahead of us. I don't know what will stop that. It's still ahead of us. It hasn't been done so far, to my knowledge. We were approached by Costa, who you'll be aware of in Australia, maybe 8 years ago. And the reason they approached us was that they had actually started doing some test work, such as you described, using biochar as a substrate. And as it turned out, they used a very coarse wood-based substrate, and the aqueous media just ran straight through. So it didn't retain for long enough, so it didn't work. But talking with Pete Vandergoor, who owns the larger glasshouse, I don't see a lot of reasons why it won't work. Of course, finding a way to do it that's economic and so on, we need to find a way to package it and so on. But in terms of technically why it wouldn't work, I don't know a reason.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So at Kattunga, what we're doing there is so the syngas from Peter's RBE process is obviously a source of heat for the hothouses. And one of the things that we've been doing at Optimal with Costa and with Perfection and now with Kattunga is we put in microgas turbines, so capstone turbines, to provide power and heat for these hothouses because they need a lot of both. But what we're doing at Kattunga, which is quite unique, is that we're putting in a new 16 megawatt boiler. And so we've got 2.4 megawatts of gas turbines. The exhaust from those gas turbines, we're recovering heat from. The hot water goes into the tanks. The cooled exhaust is then being used as combustion air in this new 16 megawatt boiler. And that boiler has got 2 burners in it. It's got a natural gas burner and it's got a syngas burner. And so we'll burn all the syngas, and then all of that CO2 that's there is then being cooled and is being used for fertigation. So that is a really unique setup. It will make potentially, well, if we build an anaerobic digester at Kattunga will be certainly the first totally green hothouse in the country. And this is an enormous opportunity in hothouses all around the world, even if you're just using, some natural gas and the syngas. So I think there's huge complementary opportunities with the syngas in that area.
Yes. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Okay. No. So big potential for bioenergy in Australia. It's almost half our renewable energy generation, as I understand it. So yeah, big potential for the bioenergy and to be carbon negative bioenergy because it's got the biochar with it. So if you could all please thank our panel again today, that would be great. And please, if you'd like to ask them any further questions, grab them individually, or please come and see us over at the Australian New Zealand Biochar Pavilion, stand F36. You can see it from here, and happy to take any questions. So thank you very much for participating today.